Let's talk now to the investigative journalist Antony Loewenstein, who joins us from Jerusalem. Good to have you with us, Antony. So Netanyahu has had many challenging times in politics in his life, so it's not the first for sure. What's really different this time round? Is anything different?
Well, I guess the main difference is that he's a sitting prime minister being indicted by his attorney general. That is quite unprecedented in Israeli history. And in fact, there aren't many cases of Western countries where a leader, prime minister or president could be indicted and remain in office. I mean, there's an election in about 6 weeks here in Israel. And Netanyahu, at the moment, according to the polls, is a little bit behind his opposition, but could well win. And the question is, what does that actually mean in a practical sense? You would have a sitting re-elected prime minister who's indicted on corruption, 3 different corruption cases, potentially staying in office. That's a pretty strange, unprecedented situation.
But, I mean, running for a 5th term has its own challenges internally, but on the world stage, with the President Putin and Trump backing him, his foreign policy is seen as a success. So can these criminal charges really cause him any damage at all?
Well, that's an interesting question. One of the things that I think many people are missing in this debate, within Israel particularly, most of the media coverage here in Israel is very, very narrow. In many ways, yes, Netanyahu is facing these corruption charges, but to be honest, the more serious questions are around many deaths in Gaza from Israeli troops firing on unarmed Palestinians, which the UN just yesterday found were potentially a war crime. There have been a number of Gaza wars in the last year since he was Prime Minister. The occupation has been now of 52 years. You're right, though, Donald Trump supports him, Putin does, and many far-right European leaders do support Netanyahu. And in fact, many in the Republican Party in the US and the Democratic Party in the US. So internationally, he does have a lot of support. But to me, the question is who would replace him in Israel? And the likely alternatives, if he loses in about 6 weeks, are maybe not quite as right-wing, but have no plan.
Just as you mentioned, I mean, there's 6 weeks ahead of elections, and his opponents are demanding that he step down, and they said they would not join any future government that he was running. So what do you expect to happen?
In Israel, only a fool predicts what's going to happen. There was a poll a few days ago before he was indicted, which put his opposition party slightly ahead of him. So if you ask me what's likely to happen, I think it's possible he will not win the election and therefore can't form a coalition. But let's not forget, a week ago, Netanyahu formed a potential coalition with some of the most far-right fascist parties in Israel, to the point where, in fact, some leaders in America condemned him for that. That's pretty unprecedented. So in some ways, Netanyahu now has nothing to lose. And the fear between now and 6 weeks is that he does something radical, starts a war, causes more violence, something which he hopes will attract more public support. But at the moment, I think it's fair to say Netanyahu certainly has a chance of winning. And let's not also forget one important point. There are millions of Palestinians at the moment who literally cannot vote in this election. Millions. And they are ultimately the ones who are going to be ruled by whoever wins in the April election.
Well, we do have to wrap it up here, but thank you very much for that insight, Antony Loewenstein.